Greetings. In this self-led module called USAID Contracts, Factors, and Proposal Development, here we're going to emphasize how to prepare before you go after an RFP. It's extremely important to prepare, plan, and anticipate. So we're going to talk about designing a strategy for contracting. Then we're going to go into understanding USAID and how to anticipate contractual opportunities. And then we're going to get into some of the details of how to prepare to respond to your RFP. Okay, one of the most important factors is to make sure you have a strategy as for why your organization is going after contracts. Because USAID contracts and any US government contracting, it is a more complex and administratively challenging way to implement projects. If you're very organized and you understand the regulatory framework of contracting, you can be very successful, and then contracting becomes easier and easier and less administratively burdensome. But in the beginning, it's a large climb. It's like climbing Mount Kilimanjaro. You've really got to want to understand it, and you've really got to have a strategy of how the entire team is going to get there. So one of the first things to do as an organization such as AMREF is to discuss why go after US government contracts. Mostly organizations, especially nonprofits, are going after contracts because traditional assistant work with USAID or other US government agencies is being reframed into USAID contracting opportunities. And there are usually fundamentally two reasons as to why USAID, when they historically used cooperative agreements, are now changing to contracts. One of the first reasons would be they want to change who's implementing the contract. But usually the reason that USAID switches from cooperative agreements to contracts is this particular technical priority. They want it to be on the road of closure. They want to complete the development objectives and move on to other priorities. But also sometimes they're not satisfied with what's happening in cooperative agreements and they want to have more oversight or control. Another reason that organizations might be going after contracting is they're staying true to their organization's mission priorities. So it doesn't really matter what the funding mechanism is. If your priority is global health and you're seeing a lot of global health contracting, then you're going after global health contracting because it's fundamentally true to your organization's priorities. I find that to be one of the best reasons. Another reason that might come into play is that an organization just wants to be good at both types of mechanisms. They want to be successful at cooperative agreements and grants, and they want to be successful in contracting so that their donor partner, USAID, sees them as multi-talented and a reliable implementing partner. Many organizations also understand that if you choose to go into contracting, this does catapult your organization to further develop much more robust systems, policies, and procedures, and it catapults you into greater accountability for development performance. Another great motivator is to make a profit, which increases your unrestricted funding for nonprofit organizations. So for example, in contracting, the US government will offer what is called a fee, which is basically a percentage of profit that you are allowed to earn. So whether you're a nonprofit or a for-profit, all organizations are allowed to request a fee. And in fact, the US government encourages, because they find the fee to be a motivating factor to success. of a project, that an organization will be motivated that if they do well and the contract is completed, they will receive a significant percentage of the budget as a profit, which becomes unrestricted funding. And after the contract is closed, that fee and profit that you have earned on a contract becomes unrestricted funding and then is available for that organization to do what they would like. However, at the same time, there are fundamental concerns, or what I call worries, in contracting. Organizations want to go after contracting, but they understand that their operational systems, their policies and procedures, they're not sure that they match the level of expectations with the contract regulations. So it's important to create a process that confirms that your financial management, your procurement, your ethical standards, your human resource policies and procedures, your full package of operational policies and procedures, it's important to confirm that they are compliant to the body of contractual regulations. The other concern within contracting is there are so many regulations to understand and adhere to. The other thing is the relationship with USAID is much more of a micromanagement relationship. USAID will be more involved. There will be constant contact and requests and emails and meetings. In addition, contracting, there are a lot of for-profit businesses that have done contracting for more than 50, 60 years with the US government internationally. So there is a lot more competition when it comes to the contract opportunities. So it's a super competitive environment. The other concern of many organizations is contracting. Remember, you're building a vendor relationship with USAID. USAID is purchasing this development opportunity, this service. They look at it as something that they are purchasing. And so until they are satisfied and until they've bought what they want, an organization has to provide the funding, and then on a contract, you're typically reimbursed. So an organization has to make sure they have enough cash flow to perform the contract and then submit regular invoices to be reimbursed. Another concern in contracting is, since a contract is where USAID is purchasing something, it also behaves as if you have been seconded to work for the US government, because that is the nature of a contract. It builds a vendor relationship between you and USAID. So that is the primary relationship, is your organization to the relationship of the contract with USAID. The beneficiary population is still important, but they actually become secondary when implementing a contract. So USAID becomes your customer and your client. So it's very important. It's a mental shift in how to approach contracting. As stated previously, also, contracting will change your organization. There will be equal demands and time spent on administrative details in addition to the programmatic implementation priorities. There will be an enormous amount of back and forth with USAID. There will be greater attention to the compliance details, which means there's also greater cost of penalties when mistakes are made in contracting, which you will learn through the course. There are more financial reports, more programmatic reports, so there's an increase in administrative expectations. There's almost nonstop monitoring evaluation. It is a constant process of proving and demonstrating that you are meeting the exact results stipulated in the request for proposals. A request for proposals is written almost like a recipe, and you have to follow each of those instructions to the letter of the law that is given in that RFP. because the request for proposals, 95% of what is written in that request for proposals, the RFP, becomes the official contract. The US government is extremely transparent. The RFP will become the contract if you win the contract. And so the instructions are extremely important to pay attention to read and reread. And the expectation, since the government is purchasing something from you, is those results will be met. And then in contracting, just in general, it's going to be a whole new language, a whole new set of forms and formats, all new certain processes will have to be introduced, and it's a whole body of new regulations. Now, some of the regulations will feel very much like cooperative agreements and assistance, but others will not, because in contracting, each contract, each RFP is unique, and the regulations are written to that specific contract. So that the contract becomes, again, the recipe. Be contractor ready. So the beauty of the Federal Acquisition Regulations, referred to as the FAR, is they lay out in their 51 chapters of the Federal Acquisition Regulations, the FAR Part 1, they call their chapters parts. So FAR Part 1 all the way to FAR Part 51 are the robust details of exactly what the US government expects of a potential contractor. And in FAR Part 9 in particular, they actually have, it reads like a checklist. So if you work in business development, I strongly encourage you to, well, I encourage all staff to read FAR Part 9, the entire chapter. It goes into detail exactly what the US government expects of an organization when they implement a contract. And so one of the first priorities that the US government will evaluate is, do you have enough cash flow? Do you have the financial resources in order to execute this contract? And then the second thing they will evaluate is your technical performance. Are you actually capable of meeting the deadlines? Because in contracting, it's extremely rare to have a no-cost extension. They will set the deadline and they expect you to meet the programmatic results by those deadlines. So there isn't a lot of negotiation once those deadlines have been set. Failure to meet those deadlines has very serious consequences, which we will talk about in the course. And then, of course, the US government will look historically at your performance record, both technically and operationally. They will look at your financial management historical performance. They will look at how your staff management performance historically, and they will look at the record that you have on file with the US government in regards to your technical performance. So all of your previous cooperative agreements and those reports and USAID's overall impression of your organization, that will become part of their evaluation. In addition, an organization that goes into contracting, similar to cooperative agreements and grants, you must have a satisfactory record of integrity and business ethics. So that there aren't any, the US government is looking to make sure that there aren't any massive records of fraud or conflicts of interest. And it comes back to what I often say in any course: no lying, no cheating, no stealing. Don't hide the mistakes. Be transparent. So no lying, no cheating, no stealing, no hiding. And then no abusing of power, no abusing your staff, no abusing your beneficiaries. So the US government is going to carefully look at your record of the ethical behavior of your organization and its staff. And then it will also evaluate and make sure that you have in place the appropriate technical skills and management controls and internal controls to manage a contract and to manage millions of dollars of money. And of course, they will always evaluate whether or not your policies and procedures, They will look at procurement and property, accounting and financial management, international travel, human resources, how do you manage subcontracts, and your entire monitoring and evaluation. Are you able to provide evidence on what you state has been completed and has been successful? Is there a monitoring and evaluation system in place? So this is a small checklist for the moment, but it covers the fundamental areas that the U.S. government expects in order for a contractor to be ready to take on a contract. And then we always advise also to assess your organization before going into contracting. Are you ready for contracting? Do these contracting opportunities truly fit within your mission and your priorities, your technical priorities and your strategy of your organization for the next 3 to 5 years? If they do, then that's great. If they don't, you might want to decide that contracting is not appropriate. Does your organization, do you have enough knowledge, donor knowledge, about how to implement a contract, how to prepare an RFP? If not, this is a really good step to prepare to understand better USAID and contracting. Do you have the capacity to execute? Do you have the right staff when it comes to contracting? Contracting is often executed in a project management model, not a country office model. So you will see that most contractors create an entire office and setup just for a contract. It happens, but it's not very common that contracts are operated through a country office management. So you also need to be very, very careful. Do you have the capacity to execute? Do you possibly need to change the model of management in order to implement correctly a contract? So it's something to think about. Who are the competitors? Have you compared yourself to the competitors? Can you assess whether or not your organization is organized, that you have a great attention to detail, because contracting and going after a contract demands an enormous attention to administrative detail. What is the reputation of your organization? Have you recently Googled yourself? If we Google your organization, if we Google AMREF, what is the first thing that comes up on Google or Bing? What is the first news item when it comes to your organization? And then how about the reputation of your senior managers? Have you Googled them? What's the first thing that comes up of all of your executive leadership and your board of directors? So also understanding the outside perspective that people have on your organization. Have you ever heard rumors about your organization via your donors, including the US government as your donor? And then does your leadership support going after contracting? If you do not have the support of the executive leadership when it comes to contracting, then the RFP process and the executing of a contract will not go very well. So it is extremely important to make sure that everyone is on board. And you definitely want to take a deep dive and assess the country office, kind of ask the same questions as we stated previously, but dig deeper on whether or not they have the capacity. You don't want to overburden your staff when it comes to contracting. Are they the best suited? What are the competitors in the country? What is the country office's reputation with the donor, with USAID, for example? Do you understand the costs enough? Do you have a market survey? Can you base your costs and prices in a budget based upon evidence? Does anyone in the country office have any experience in contracting? If not, that's going to be a heavy lift to get your country office staff, if they're the ones implementing a contract and they've never had any experience in contracting, that is a heavy lift to get them to the next level to implement a contract. It's not an easy switch necessarily from cooperative agreements to contracts. It's a very different mentality, as you will learn through the course, and it's a very different attention to detail. And then, as previously stated, really scope out the environment in every country that you would like to pursue contracting. Who are the competitors? What are their strengths and weaknesses? You could do a SWOT analysis: strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats, risks, etc. What are some of the unexpected competitors? Are there organizations that you think won't go after a contract, but then all of a sudden you see that they are going after a contract? So you need to analyze what is their chance of winning versus your chance of winning, and to truly be very honest about that opportunity. So the next part that we're going to talk about in this self-led module is it's extremely important to understand USAID and its language that they use in technical implementation. And also, it's extremely important to anticipate the opportunities of USAID. If you are responding to a contractual opportunity the moment an RFP is released and no previous research has been done, you are already way too late, and it's not worth going through the RFP process. You cannot win an RFP without doing the important research before that request for proposals is ever released. So USAID in general currently awards approximately $20 billion in contracts and cooperative agreements and grants. And the assistance opportunities are grants and cooperative agreements, and those are advertised through NOFOs. They used to be an RFAs. So a NOFO is a notice of funding opportunities, and they still also sometimes release what they call a request for applications. If you see a NOFO or an RFA, that typically means it's an assistance opportunity. It's a grant or a cooperative agreement opportunity. Under acquisition, which is contracting, contracts are advertised, as I have previously stated, in request for proposals, RFPs. Now, USAID still splits these opportunities pretty evenly between acquisition, contracts. If you go after an RFP, you will get a type of contract, and 50% of the funds still are implemented through assistance, grants, and cooperative agreements. And we've given you a nice visual on this slide to see acquisition. You're responding to an RFP, and your legal agreement, if you win, will be a contract. If you go after a NOFO or an RFA, a request for applications, or a notice of funding opportunity, the legal agreement will be a grant or cooperative agreement. Okay, so there are 5 steps to anticipating the release of an RFP, a request for proposals. And the first step is to look at USAID's congressional budget justification. Because every year in October and November, USAID is required to submit the budget to the President's Executive, the OMB, Office of Management and Budget, to justify what are their priorities for the following year. So today, you can go to this link and read what USAID is anticipating for the year 2022, which then means you can know, and they will give you geographic priorities, and they will give you technical thematic priorities in this congressional budget justification. So it's really important to look at those every year and organize your strategy around where is USAID going to be spending their money. The second step is to make sure that your organization has mastered the country development cooperation strategy that exists for every USAID mission. It's called the CDCS. The CDCS is a very detailed document that will provide you exactly what are the priorities of that USAID mission, that specific country. And in addition, they will give you the goals, objectives, and expected indicators and results that they are looking for in that CDCS. And then thirdly, step number 3 is USAID does regularly publish what they call their business forecasts. And on this website of USAID's business forecast, anyone who wants to receive an email in order to receive these business forecasts, where they will tell you, we anticipate releasing an RFP in the next 3 months on this particular thematic area for the country of Ghana, for example. So it's extremely important to make sure that your business development staff and other staff that are interested, that want to anticipate what USAID is going to do in the near to long-term future, to sign up for the business forecasts. And you can do that at the website provided on this slide. Step number 4 is USAID also publishes annual performance statements. It covers the current year and the current priorities, and they are published on USAID's website, so you can get idea as to what they anticipate for this particular current fiscal year. So an annual performance statement usually comes out in October every year, and it lasts through the following September. The last step in anticipating or responding, actually, so steps 1 through 4 provide you information in order to anticipate and be ready and go, that somebody's watching and knows that soon USAID is going to post officially an RFP on the beta.sam.gov. So the beta.sam.gov is the site for where to look for any published releases of RFPs, request for proposals. So following that site, you would only follow the beta.sam.gov if you already know that an opportunity is about to be released, because it's extremely important to prepare for that opportunity before it is released. So USAID also, there are other ways in which you could anticipate opportunities, because USAID also often does these first top 3 types of solicitations, 1, 2, 3. Request for information. When USAID sends out a request for information, they're also telling you that they want to do something, but they don't have enough information. And so if you see a request for information, and those would also again be on beta.sam.gov or on USAID's website, they will also be talked about in the business forecasts. These requests for information, RFIs, if there's an RFI thematically that's interesting to your organization, then you want to respond to it. Because by responding to it, you also get more and more information about what is USAID prioritizing, what do they want. And then, of course, USAID is using the broad agency announcements, where they talk about co-development, where USAID wants to work with partners and put partners together to develop and innovate a better development idea. And so often the final result of a broad agency announcement is either a release of an RFP or a release of a NOFO, a notice of funding opportunity, or it also can lead to that USAID decides that the organizations that were involved in the BAA, they found the organizations with whom they'd like to work, and they immediately go into a contractual or grant cooperative agreement negotiation. Then also you have annual program statements, and sometimes through an APS, there are calls for concept papers, or USAID will release what they call a draft RFA or a draft RFP, which is more sophisticated than an RFI, but a draft RFA or a draft RFP still expresses to everyone in public, USAID is not yet ready. They don't have enough information, and so they're seeking information from the technical experts through a call for concept papers or a call through draft RFAs and RFPs. However, so in solicitation releases 1, 2, and 3, those 3 possibilities, an organization can actually influence USAID's direction of a potential opportunity. Whereas when you get to 4, 5, and 6, fully competitive NOFOs, fully competitive RFPs, or a fully competitive APS, an annual program statement, that means USAID knows exactly what they want, and you just have to follow the recipe of the RFP. You can't influence their direction anymore. You can only influence during these first 3 types of releases. So, important message through this process is RFPs are highly competitive. If you begin to prepare for your proposal with the release of the RFP, you are already too late. You cannot respond to an RFP because RFPs are typically 30, 45, or 90 days. If none of the previous research has been done, if you don't have your subcontractors in place, you're not sure what the technical priorities will be, you will come to the RFP already too late. The RFP process is not meant to be the process to start getting things together. It's to finalize what you already have anticipated. The earlier you start, that provides you, the bidder, a chance to shape your approach before it's publicly released. So you need to compile and track opportunities in order to anticipate them, and then you will know what type of opportunity will be coming down the pipeline, and the cost of that opportunity will be more clear. You will be able to make a decision on whether or not to go after an RFP even before it's released, because you have done the appropriate research and anticipation based upon those 5 steps of anticipating USAID funds, which also would include your own networking with organizations. You can learn a lot from other people about what is USAID going to release in the future. In addition to anticipating the funding, the second most important point before an RFP is released is make sure that your organization has mastered USAID's development strategies, that you are well versed in USAID's language. And the 3 strongest development strategies that guide every RFP is the document of journey to self-reliance, the CDCS, the Country Development Cooperation Strategy, which we had mentioned is part of the anticipatory section, and then to truly master USAID's philosophy on collaborating, learning, and adapting. And we've provided for you all of these websites that give you the details on the program cycle and the details on what USAID means by collaborating, learning, and adapting. But hopefully you already know and are well versed in USAID's philosophy and development strategy on the journey to self-reliance. So USAID, and even though there's a new administration currently in the United States, this journey to self-reliance, the name might change, but we really don't anticipate that the fundamental meaning behind the journey to self-reliance will change. So USAID has decided to reorientate its technical strategies and partnership models and program practices to achieve greater development outcomes and work toward a time when foreign assistance is no longer needed, to work themselves out of a job. So USAID works very closely with host country governments and implementing partners to see how to achieve locally and sustainable results that are owned by the people of the country that wants to be developed and work itself out of severe poverty and other development goals. So USAID wants to help countries mobilize public and private revenues in addition to USAID's revenues to strengthen these local capacities, accelerate enterprise-driven development. They are hoping that this approach will foster stable, resilient, and prosperous countries that are more self-reliant and prioritizes enduring partnerships. So this is just a summary of Journey to Reliance, but notice the language that they use. And you will see this type of language permeated throughout RFPs and other financial opportunities from USAID. The CDCSs, as stated previously, is a country development cooperation strategy. It defines exactly how a USAID country mission wants to further the goals of ending the need for foreign assistance. And in this CDCS, they will articulate how and where it's going to focus on self-reliance with the country partner. A CDCS typically covers 5 years, but even if a CDCS that is available, for example, for Uganda, states that that was from 2013 to 2018, if that still is the only copy of the CDCS, that means the country mission is still using that original CDCS that they developed. So don't worry so much about, quote, it doesn't truly expire till they take it off the website. So the CDCS is the essential roadmap of exactly how USAID will design and implement its RFPs and RFAs, or its NOFOs. So mastering the CDCS will very much allow you to anticipate what type of activities and priorities will be published to be completed. The CDCS process centers around a missions dialogue with USAID Washington and all of the key stakeholders in countries, such as the national government, implementing partners, and the CDCS. Inside the CDCS, they publish the exact milestones and deliverables that USAID is looking for. And the CDCS is typically a robust document, and so all of that language will be used in an RFP. And then in addition, USAID has prioritized greatly collaborating, learning, and adapting. It's part of the program cycle of USAID. So I refer you back to those websites. It's extremely important to also master the program cycle of USAID, but in particular, master what USAID believes to be very important, which is collaborating, learning, and adapting. And they also often add human-centered design. They want the user, the end beneficiary, to be very involved in how development goals should be completed, designed, and used, etc. And the collaborating, learning, and adapting methodology and philosophy and tools are not optional. These are a mandatory set of practices that USAID will incorporate in every project. And so these tools talk about the strategic, who are the stakeholders that you need to collaborate with? How do you get everyone in the room? What are we constantly learning from trial and error and this process of development? And how do we adapt what we're learning? How do we pivot correctly? Because collaboration and what you learn and how you do what you do usually creates a moment where a different direction needs to be stated. So USAID believes that integrating CLA, collaborating, learning, and adapting into your work will ensure that programs are coordinated with others, grounded in strong evidence, and adapted to remain relevant throughout implementation. So it's extremely important to master the CDCS, master the journey to self-reliance, and really dig deep on how does USAID view the program cycle, and particularly the tools that they've developed that are available on their website when it comes to collaborating, learning, and adapting. There are also other factors that will affect USAID's decisions that go into an RFP. So for example, USAID is a US government agency, and therefore there are congressional authorizations and there's congressional laws and legislation that mandate what USAID must focus on. And so they also have to pay attention to congressional authorizations and legislation, because within certain congressional authorizations and legislation, it will guide USAID's policy, it will justify USAID's approach on something, And often this legislation provides specific guidelines that USAID then has to provide to its implementing partners because they are legally bound to fulfill the congressional authorizations and legislation. In addition, don't forget about gender and youth. Integrating gender is extremely important to USAID. And remember that gender is not just women. Gender is about how will this development affect women, and how does this development idea affect men? And is there anything we need to do to assure that everyone has access, no matter their gender, no matter their age, for example? And then youth, USAID often focuses on youth to make sure that if there's a particular development idea that's affecting youth differently, that also is taken into consideration in the response to the development need. And for more information on all of USAID's strategies, we have given you the website where they list all of their agency-wide strategies and policies. And the main ones are the three up above: Journey to Self-Reliance, the CDCS, and then the program cycle, particularly collaborating, learning, and adapting. But there might be others very specific to your thematic priorities, and so I do encourage you to go to that website. Here's a list of USAID's core programmatic areas. They focus on agriculture and food security, democracy, human rights and governance, economic growth and trade, education. Environment and global climate change is now again a priority of the US government. Gender equality and women's empowerment, global health, and now reproductive health will return as a priority. Humanitarian assistance, water and sanitation, and then working in crisis and conflict. To know the details of all of this and the type of language again used in these core programmatic areas, please go to USAID's website of usaid.gov what we do. And that will give you the full details, and it also will help you learn the language of how USAID talks about something. Because when you respond to a solicitation of USAID, it's extremely important to use their own language. USAID also has still some remaining presidential initiatives: PEPFAR, HIV/AIDS. And PEPFAR is an interesting example of there are certain countries that the United States government would like to graduate out of PEPFAR because their government and private public sector can now fully take care of the HIV/AIDS situation in that particular country. So you might have already noticed that USAID, when it comes to HIV/AIDS funds, is moving more toward contracting because they want to graduate that country away from USAID's funding in PEPFAR. There still is also the President's Malaria Initiative, and then there's always a focus on the neglected tropical diseases, and then there's the Feed the Future, the focus on food security. So it's also important that if any of your technical priorities fall under PEPFAR or Presidential Malaria Initiative or food security or neglected tropical diseases, to make sure that you have learned what there is to learn about these presidential initiatives. So now the last section of this particular session is we're going to talk about the request for proposals and how to approach an RFP. And then note that we state pay attention to the details. An RFP is typically anywhere from 120 to 200 pages long, and you must read it, and you must read it again and again. And as stated previously, before the RFP is released, the US government, USAID, would already expect that before that RFP is released, that you actually have some type of concept paper already drafted because you've been anticipating this RFP, that you fundamentally already understand USAID's overarching goal, their programmatic and technical focus. You kind of have an idea of how much you think it might cost to implement because you've heard about the priorities, you're anticipating the priority. Before the RFP is released, your proposal team is already ready to go. Roles and responsibilities have been clearly defined, and you've identified who's going to do what. So all of this happens before a solicitation is released. In addition, you come to an RFP with the external factors already decided, meaning you already know who your subcontractors are going to be, if that's possible. If it's not possible, then you know that you will have a line item in your budget that just will say potential subcontractors a certain amount of money. The RFP process is too short of a time frame to decide who your subcontractors are going to be. So during the anticipatory phase, you also have to seek out your potential partners, which in contracting are called subcontractors. And then in addition, your key personnel or important staff for a contract, those potential staff members should already also be identified. Maybe not fully recruited, but at least a letter of commitment between you and a potential really good candidate for a chief of party or a deputy chief of party. You already have letters of commitment. Again, the RFP timeline is too short of a timeline to recruit potential key personnel. You need to come to the solicitation of an RFP already with your key staff. And then before an RFP is released, you probably should also analyze, do you need any consulting services for this proposal? Do you need a contracting compliance expert? Do you need a contracting RFP expert? Who do you need to help you go through this? Especially if it's one of the first times that you've gone after contracting, you really want to make sure that you understand the RFP holistically in detail. So if you need help, make sure to go after that help. And Humentum is happy to help through that. They have those services. So you've prepped, the RFP is finally released. Okay. Well, an RFP legally must follow FAR Part 15. So even before an RFP is released, I encourage you to read FAR Part 15, because FAR Part 15, that chapter of the Federal Acquisition Regulation, explains the entire RFP process for agencies and contractors to follow. So that's extremely important to read before an RFP is released. But once the RFP is released, the team has to read the RFP and understand the terms and conditions of the RFP, because you need to develop questions to clarify the RFP and its demands, and then read it again and read it again. So within the first 48 hours of an RFP release, the entire team should have at least read it 2 or 3 or 4 times. And then there are going to be budget instructions, and there are going to be submission instructions. Try to throw into a budget template that they give you in a contract, because each contract's budget template is unique. So if they give you a budget template, put some fake budget items in that template to test the formulas and the assumptions about what they're asking you to do, so that during the question period that you're allowed to ask questions of USAID, if you need any clarification on exactly how to submit that budget, that will be very important to ask before the deadline of the questions. Usually the question period is a week, so you have 1 week to submit questions, and then that deadline will close, and then you can't ask questions anymore. So be very, very careful that you've read and reread and like 3 or 4 times, and you've tested and you've kind of mocked out during the first 72, 3 to 4 days a budget. You've mocked out a couple of budget items to see how the formulas work, and you've also looked at the long list of submission. Are there any instructions missing? Make no assumptions. Now, an RFP, according to FAR Part 15, follows a basic template. There will always be a cover page. It's usually never more than 1 page. It's very short, but it is full of key information. It will have many of the deadlines on that first page. It will have exactly which type of contract you potentially will win if you win the proposal. It will give you the financial maximum, etc. It's full of information on that first page. Section B is all about the budget and the approach to the financing. It's not the instructions on the budget. It explains the cost factors that the US government is expecting. And then Section C, the statement of work, what often we refer to as a program description. But USAID, the reason it's called statement of work, because remember, it's a contract, and so you are being hired for this work. It's creating a vendor relationship with USAID. So it's important to use USAID's language. So when they provide that statement of work of this is exactly what we want, never go outside of that statement of work. Use the type of language that they use in that statement of work. And then section F is the deliverable schedule, or often the performance schedule, exactly when they expect things to happen, and a list of deliverables, the results that they also expect at the end of this contract. Section G, that highlights a lot of the rules and the regulations that will govern the contract. So you want to make sure that you read through those. That's extremely important. Section H is even more important than Section G because Section H details the special contract requirements and the added regulations that USAID would like to add. So Section H, G, H, and I, so there are 3 sections that fundamentally walk you through exactly all of the contractual terms and conditions and the compliance expectations for the contract that will be won. And then Section K, this section should already be almost completed before an RFP is released. So USAID Section K looks very similar on most RFPs. So we would recommend that you download a Section K from any RFP. You walk through each representation and certification before you go after an RFP. Take a former RFP, go through Section K, and set up in a Word document your own representation and certifications from an old RFP. And then when you go after a new RFP, you download that Section K, compare it to your draft representation and certifications that you've created before the RFP, and then adapt accordingly to every RFP. But the more and more that you approach RFPs, Section K becomes an administrative detail that's easy to tweak and change based upon previous representation and certification moments. So technically, this should already be on file, but if this is your first time, download a Section K from a previous RFP, fill it all out into a Word document, and then for every RFP that's released, compare the two and then just tweak accordingly, adapt and edit accordingly. Section L are the specific and detailed instructions required to respond to a proposal. One mistake and the proposal will be rejected. So you want to make sure that somebody can extrapolate out of the entire RFP, but specifically also from sections K and L, a solid checklist of everything that has to be completed before you submit, so that somebody is monitoring exactly what needs to happen. And then the evaluation criteria is extremely important because it provides the specific details on exactly how your technical approach will be judged. And something that's extremely important when it comes to the technical volume is that the technical volume, the approach that should be taken is the project will do the following. It's not about your organization will do the following and then your subcontractors will do this. The US government is buying the entirety of what you're offering. So what they're buying is the project. So when you go through the technical volume, you want to make sure your language is the project team will complete the following. The project's team approach is the following. And then you can say, and the reason that we have such and such subcontractor is because they add value to this particular result that the team will complete. The team will be successful. So that's also another mental shift. When you respond to an RFP, it's about stating the project will do this, the project team will do this. It's not about your organization and then the sub or partner will do this. It's a holistic team approach to everyone has to work toward the final end results. So again, you got to read the RFP, read it again and again and again. If they cite a regulation in a paragraph, you need to make sure that people read that citation of the regulation and they understand that regulation. If you don't understand elements of the RFP, make sure you have hired an expert to help you through that RFP. You will only have 5 to 7 working days to prepare questions for USAID. So the amount of time that you spend reading and rereading that RFP will be so fundamentally crucial. And do a fake couple of line items in every section in a budget to make sure that the budget instructions are very clear. You need to be extremely organized when responding to an RFP. Make a proposal calendar for the proposal team to track each element that must be completed for review and then completed for submission. Create a checklist with the comprehensive list of all submission requirements. Follow the instructions very, very carefully. Any mistakes in submission and the RFP will be rejected. If they say Time New Romans size 12, it's Time New Romans size 12. If they say 1-inch margins on US sized paper, it's 1-inch margins on US sized paper. An RFP will read like a recipe. You must follow the recipe. Don't add anything to the recipe and don't subtract anything from the recipe. You have to be hyperly organized to respond to an RFP. Make sure that through that proposal calendar that you can create a 3-time review process. The technical volume needs to be reviewed 3 times. The budget and budget narrative needs to be reviewed 3 times. Double check before submitting the response. Follow the submission instructions very carefully. These are always found in section L in an RFP. Before you send that email with the proposal, make sure you send it to an outside email, an email outside of your organization, in order to make sure, have somebody open up everything and make sure that everything opens up correctly. There are no longer any track changes. You've cleaned that all up and you've turned off track changes. It's not wonky on the page. The font, it's clear. Make sure you have somebody that has a great attention to administrative and formatting detail to make that last review, to make sure it's clean and pretty. So in this course, the next step is you have a homework on how to read an RFP. And you have until next Thursday, March 4th, to complete this RFP reading exercise. It does need to be completed before you can get a certificate. The exercise is found in day 1 on the platform, in the e-learning platform. And remember, always ask us questions. We're here to answer your questions. You can put questions in the e-learning platform. We check it every day. Life is good. So there are 5 or 6 RFPs to choose from. We've provided an RFP for each region. I know that most of you are in the Africa region, but please choose at least one of these. Maybe look at it from the technical point of view instead of the regional point of view. You can read any RFP that you would like. We really only want you to focus on sections H, I, L, and M. And as you focus on sections H, I, L, and M, but I do encourage you to read the entire RFP, let us know which RFP you've read and what type of contract USAID is proposing. And then highlight at least 2 areas that you can explain to us where your organization is required to be compliant according to the RFP. And then also identify 2 topics that were either new to you or create a concern for you and your organization. So that is what it means briefly to go after an RFP and how to anticipate US government RFPs and how to approach an RFP once it's released. So I wish you luck. I will see you in the webinars. Have a great day. Take care.